HG Marks back again, and I am here with Eric Pace. He is the head of AI at Cox Communications. Eric, first of all, thank you for joining me. Second of all, that sounds like a very stressful job, right? So I don't even want to ask how many Zolofs you're on at this point, but head of AI at a big telecommunications company sounds like a big deal. So first of all, how long have you been doing this? How did you learn to do this?
Yeah.
And what do you do at Cox? Let's start with that.
Awesome. Well, Gene, thanks for having me as well. Pleasure to be here. Happy to talk about all of the alternatives to Zoloft I've found over the last year. So yeah, head of AI at Cox Communications. We took a different approach, I think, than most have, at least most that we've run into have over the past really year and a half. And we Cox as a leadership team chose to centralize AI function as we got started and as we grew into the maturity landscape. So I've been at Cox for about 7 years. I've
Hmm.
got a long history, probably longer than I am willing to admit, and in big consulting. And in that big consulting career, I really did a variety of things across their entire go-to-market strategy. And I think that's what really prepped me for the role that I'm in today because AI touches everything. And
Yeah,
so when you are asked to go do a job that spans strategy, governance, and implementation, you have to have some form of technical background and you have to have some experience working in a lot of different capacities across a business. And so that's ultimately what prepped me for what I do today. And the role that I've got does those three things. Like we crafted an AI strategy after we formalized the organization at the end of last year. I had some AI responsibilities in 2025 as we put together a council. We started to govern some of the use cases that we had, et cetera. But then the leadership team realized, oh, this guy is telling us this is real. It's in November of last year, October of last year. It's not going away. So we should double down and figure out how we go really find the value that everybody seems to have trouble finding. And if there
sure.
is, at least one person can be responsible for, distributed elements of the strategy and helping harvest whatever we can go find. And we found ways in which we allowed the strategy and the governance and our implementation and the implementation of others to be done in a standard way, but then also we helped people understand how they were going to go find top line or bottom line value in those initiatives, knowing that we weren't going to go disrupt the entire finance organization's books in year one because some of these things, as we learn, take time to go find process maturity, change, et cetera, in adoption. But we've been at it diligently with our team for about a year now, and we have delivered real impacts to the bottom line. We are starting to find impacts to the top line, and we are starting to grow adoption metrics, quite frankly, across the board.
Um, when you take on a role like this, and again, our people that will watch this and people that will read our book, are people that are running companies, and many companies don't have the resources to hire a head of AI. So they're trying to figure it out. Where do you go to figure things out? Like where do you go for your education?
Yeah, that's something that we talked about in the beginning of this
Yeah,
year, at length when we were developing our strategy, because we were also trying to figure out how we were going to drive literacy and adoption with all of the people, right?
sure.
From content creators to technical developers to a legal analyst, over there, we've all got to figure out how to get them on a journey somewhere relative to AI. And so what we have found is that there's a lot of people that are playing with stuff, and there's a lot of people playing with stuff at a variety of different levels.
Hmm.
And for someone like me in this role, what I learned that's different than prior roles that I've had is that a lot of education has just come through attending conferences and events and talking to people that are finding elements of this journey on their own. And
Yes.
then you stitch all of that together and you put together your own story and approach to figuring out however it's going to apply here. And that's different because I would say, the pie of sources for anybody's learning in a traditional job, 30 to 40% doesn't come from conferences and events, right? It
Right.
comes from on-the-job training and those types of things. I've talked to everybody that I can talk to and soaked up as much as possible to distill applicable information from what we do. And then, we can get into it a little bit later, but parts of my team also help drive through our research function some of the things that we should be paying attention to and
Right.
ultimately how they apply to what we do as a business.
I gotta tell you what I do. So, so I write about this for Forbes. That's where my book came from. Like, our book is AI for business. And people have asked me the same question I just asked you. So I actually have a woman who she's on my market. I have 10 people in my company, and one of them does Gail does marketing for me. But I pay her every day to spend, I say, I want you to take an hour a day and Google, now around, but search for any articles on AI. And I've actually got specific like AI for construction, AI for manufacturing, AI for, whatever serves. And then send me 10 to 15 links. And she does. And so I get an email from her every day and I just, I go through the links and then I see different articles that are of interest to me and I bookmark them. And then over the weekend I read and then that drives what I'm going to write about. You know what I mean? Like, oh, this type of topic. And that's worked for me. And I'm assuming that you also, I'm sure you're
Oh, endless.
perusing the web, right?
And there's that's manifested in a couple ways. What I tell people all the time is if you really want to learn how to AI, unfortunately, the best answer I've got for you is start using AI.
Use AI. Yeah,
Go get used to it. And quite frankly, you can
me
ask
too.
it questions about your own learning journey and what to do, et cetera. But then I also tell people, oddly enough, stop. I say stop typing like a robot and stop reading like a human,
Mm,
because you can give those links to an AI, have it
mm,
summarize all of the information that's in there, and then really focus on the things that matter. And then I oftentimes go back and say, because this has come up recently, in terms of don't trust everything that the AI does. People
mm.
think that just means read what it says and then take that as long as you agree with it at face value. And
Right.
I tell people, why don't you get the summarization back from all those articles and then ask the AI for the three things that it left out? Then you really start to get an insight into, what it is prioritizing on your behalf. And then you can coach it and say, no, 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 these types of things are important to me as well. And then it'll learn from you and include those things going forward. And you'll learn to work with these things better over time.
I that's great advice. To even add to that, different people have different ways they like to absorb their information. I drive around a lot to clients, whatever. I mean, I have ChatGPT as well. I use like three AI assistants. ChatGPT is one of them. I use the mobile app. I talk to it, like a crazy man. I'm like talking to it on the, and tell me this, but I'm having a conversation back and forth, and I'm asking different questions, and it's like a dialogue. And sometimes I feel like just reading stuff, but. I just wanted to also say, and I'm going to write about this as well, that like how you get your information is up to you, but there's all sorts of different forms,
I'm curious what your thoughts are, and you can
Yeah,
cut
it's
me off
fun.
if you want on these things, but I oftentimes find myself in these conversations about how people are concerned that critical thinking skills are going away because of AI and all that stuff. I'm in the camp of I don't believe that.
I
What I
know.
actually think in the spirit of what you just described, if you're not an organized person today, this is only going to make it worse because
Right.
you can just dump all this unstructured things into the app as you're driving, right? Talk to it, talk to it, talk to
Yeah.
it and it's a haphazard mix of all this information. At the end of the day, you're like, okay, I'm done. You tell me what's important and what I got to do tomorrow. And so I'm building no muscle and staying organized. I'm just assuming that the AI made is going to clean up my mental mess and then do something with it for me tomorrow.
I agree with you. And I'm also of the opinion when it comes to, all the AI stuff, it's like I fly a lot. I couldn't even tell you how a plane works. I don't even know how the air conditioning on a plane works. I know all I care about is I get on in Philly and it drops me off in Atlanta. You know what I mean? And so
Yes,
there's a lot of stuff that's really like I don't need to know. Like if AI is able to like do this, for me, as long as the people that designed it and are using it for whatever the end purposes are, that's all I really care about. And then that frees up people's minds to, I truly think that like if you and I were living in like the early 20th century and we both bought automobiles, we would have to be mechanics because those things broke down every 10 yards, And think about it all the time. People had to spend repairing cars, back in the day. And we don't have to do that anymore because for the most part they work.
right.
It's
Yep.
funny. All right, more questions. Do you trust AI? I get that from clients all the time, and business owners and whatever. Two things on trust. I'm going to ask you a security question. That's another topic, okay? When I mean trust, I mean generative AI. Do you trust the answers that you're getting back? And number two, if you are using any agents yet, and I don't know if you are, but you're probably going to be, and more. Do you trust them yet? And where do you see that going?
So the answer is I think we're all still in a phase where it has to be no, and
Yeah,
that comes with a spectrum. It comes with some gradation relative to the thing that you are doing, right? Like I just mentioned, if you go ask an AI or if you have an agent that's doing things like summarizing PDFs or synthesizing white papers or looking at articles, et cetera, I mean, the risk of it leaving things out of that summarization is only as great as what you're planning to do with the information. Meaning, if I use it to go synthesize a bunch of info and it's going to leave out important stuff, and then I go want to stand on stage and present that stuff, one, I'm probably want to know what it left out so that I can round out my own story and not sound like an idiot when I get there, right?
Sure.
And so I think the level of trust really sits with the intended use of whatever AI is going to produce, right? Everything from I needed to help me with basic productivity tasks all the way through I needed to, help me make not consequential decisions on behalf of the business, but it helps me, do things like tell polished executive stories that I no longer take hours and hours to write. When I go create those, I did one over Thanksgiving, and it was a marathon session with these AIs to go get a year's worth of things synthesized in a way that I wanted to produce as a
Mm,
storyboard so
mm,
that my boss and the leadership team could have real reference to the maturity levels that we've achieved here. When it created that 25-page Word doc or the Markdown file that it gave me, did I say, all right, I'm going to scan this and let it go? No. I
mm,
really went through it and then I provided feedback. I updated the thing myself. I actually changed a lot of the way it wrote some of those things because A, I want it in my own voice. And I also wanted to understand that the way that it painted some of those pictures, I thought needed to be a little softer. And so those are elements of trust that I think just lend themselves to you have to remember this is you still that is producing the presentation or the output or representing whatever it is. And so, how comfortable are you blindly assuming that something is going to represent you without you reviewing it or knowing it? I think we're a ways away from blind trust. And so you asked about agents, and I think the short answer there is even in the form of some of the agentic things that we've got, we have some what we call self-sustaining or self-improving systems that we've built. But the parts that it's doing the self-improvement on are inconsequential to the outcome of the process. They're just making the
mm.
steps inside better. We still have full control over the outcomes and assure that whatever we use those things for are going to be better. We're just expediting the process to get to a moderately polished product.
Got it. All right. That's great. That's great. Yeah. At Cox, are you involved in what Cox is doing with AI externally for your customers, or is your focused more internally on how Cox is using AI?
Yeah, so that good question. So Cox Communications in particular. So Cox has a couple of different
Yeah.
divisions. Our AI strategies really all lend themselves to the core of what we do. Our products and services are more connectivity based, like we are
Hmm.
delivering services that have AI embedded in them. And so I would say that the touch points to the end customer come in different means. There's AI that we're embedding in what we call network operations to make the quality of our services better.
Right.
There's also AI that we're embedding in some of our digital channels to make the interactions or experiences we have with our customers better for them, better for us. And then in the moments where we have human interactions within our call centers, we're also equipping our human agents with AI features and enhancements that allow them to do their jobs more effectively, communicate with their customers more effectively, et cetera. I am involved in all of that.
Got it. So you've actually touched on some of the hot areas that AI is being used right now in corporate America, and you're developing these tools, I'm assuming yourself. So it's I'm seeing, and what I've been reporting on this past 2 years is a lot of AI being used in customer service by in corporate America. And that's ultimately going to filter its way down to smaller companies. You're using it internal for your infrastructure, right? So like you just said, to behind the scenes, making adjustments and remediations and things like that that just are automatically happening. And then and voice, I'm seeing a lot more. I mean, I wrote a piece on a company that sells a voice app for restaurants where you call to make a reservation and a bot answers the phone and takes your reservation and puts it on the schedule. And it's so I'm seeing that like actual real life usage. Is there anything I'm missing? Like what else are you doing inside of like where do you also see in 2026 you guys leaning more heavily on AI?
So I wanna go back to something you said in the
Sure.
beginning. I think A, it's important. B, it really creates an it depends moment on the maturity of the company that you're in.
Yes.
And C, I think that there's a good parallel that you can draw relative to what you referenced in the very beginning, which is okay, but what does this mean for a small or medium-sized
Yeah.
business about the same problem? So we decided early on to develop a build versus buy strategy. I got lucky in the sense that we have a very qualified team of AI engineers that understand this landscape very well. and can build AI products. And so we went through the process of assessing all of these companies that were coming in and saying, hey, I have these touch point solutions, these micro capabilities. We've put AI into X and you should use it to do X because it's the greatest X you'll ever have. And we looked at those things and we said, these are things that we could build in less than 3 months. We
Mm.
can build these things in less than 6 months. So why would we buy them? And in conjunction with that assessment, what we also started to realize is that a lot of these companies were coming with very micro-focused point solutions, and
Mm.
that ultimately lent itself to the future of having 1,000 of those things in our
Yeah.
landscape that we have to go manage. And I was like, there's no way we're going to do this, right? And so we really did eliminate the desire to go have what our leadership team affectionately calls the 1,000 flowers that bloom. Like we don't do POCs everywhere. We get hyper focused on what we know is going to work. In some cases, we have to do a POC, but we're very intent on what that POC is going to do, how it's defined, et cetera. The difference, I think, when you get into small and medium business is that we ultimately all have the same problems, right? We're all trying to do the same things. I think the difference is scale. And
Sure.
so where I sit in an enterprise and we have an end-to-end marketing platform that does the 1,000 things that it does, and someone comes and says, "Oh, by the way, one of those things I can put AI into." I've got to figure out how to integrate it into that platform. If the platform doesn't do it, then I've got to figure out how to do the 17 other things that don't have AI. All this mess emerges from that. For small and medium business, I don't think the extent of those platforms is as big. And I
Yeah.
think there's
Yeah.
ways in which they can think about some of those micro capabilities that are provided by some of these providers, A, being things that they can't go build themselves, and B, represent some significant automation potential, specifically in areas that these small business owners are just not good at, right? Like,
Right.
like lawyers are lawyers. They're not content creators.
Right.
Is the lawyer or the legal firm really creating the marketing material for what they're doing? No. Should they be using something that helps them with content creative that is a micro capability that operates at its best, knowing that I'm going to provide the content, it's going to give me the output, and then as long as I'm comfortable with it, yeah, I've got this micro solution that's really going to help. And so I think it does become a little bit different in the approach when you get into small and medium business, but
Right.
you also have to think about the elements of the business a little bit differently at that level versus, the mega platforms that we've got to deal with.
So, what I'm getting from you is that, for a large, corporation like a Cox Communications, if you have the resources and you can build a solution yourself, considering all the different, touch points that it has, that's a better direction. But for a smaller, mid-sized company, I mean, a company maybe hundreds of employees even, if you were the director of IT or head of AI at a company that was, a more of a mid-market company, you would be leaning more towards your software vendors and looking at their because you're right. I mean, they have an ERP system, they have a CRM system, they might have like three systems in the whole business where
Right.
you could go to those vendors and say, get me, I want your AI capabilities, and then I can, I'll worry about integrating them. Does that make sense?
It does. And I think about it like this, the the systems that small businesses are likely using for some of those enterprise capabilities, like the CRMs that live in that market,
Yeah,
those CRMs are coming to market with qualified AI opportunities.
true.
I think the one thing that I would say to either me, if I was that head of AI or the director of IT that sat at one of those companies, I would say, I implore you to think of one thing before you start your journey. You're getting pressure from everybody, including your owner, your CEO, or your whoever, to go figure out a way to put AI into this place so we can drive some efficiencies, right? There's got to be value in there. And what I would tell that person is what the same thing that I tell us every day. We are just not going to buy AI to get AI in here. Someone has to bring me a problem that we
Good.
have, and that problem has to be one that's good to solve with AI. That can come through some of those conversations. Like, have I heard of somebody that has used AI to solve this type of problem before? Is AI telling me that it can help these types of things along, et cetera? But so long as you're using a platform, you have a problem qualified for solution with AI, and you think that there's a viable opportunity to use the little thing that you've got, that's where you start to wade in. And then I tell people, there's some questions about how you then orchestrate workflows or how you put some of these things together. Don't think about the 53 places that you want to go solve those problems. Start thinking about it in concentric circles and growing the AI capabilities from where you start. because it'll be easier to connect those things as you go versus having 15 different things spread all over the place. And then you sit there thinking, man, I'm on the 30-yard line and I've got to connect to something on the other 20. Like
Yeah.
that's going to be really hard.
Eric, I got to tell you, first of all, like listening to you is like drinking from a fire hose. Like you are just this, like,
I'm sorry.
so much great stuff. Okay, we only have like a few minutes left, and yet there are a couple of important topics I want to get your thoughts on. Okay, give me your thoughts on security. I can Every time I talk about AI, somebody always gets up within the Q&A section. They're like, "Can we trust these people? You know, if I'm using chat every time I upload something to ChatGPT, I'm afraid they're going to take all my my company's data." Give me your thoughts on security.
Yeah, and maybe in the in the spirit of time, I'll
It's
keep
okay.
this moderately short, right? One, if you're going to go use AI, you should do a little bit of research about who you're going to give your data to, and then understand the options that you have relative to what they do with your data. Because you can tell them in a contract, you can't use my data for retraining. I want to understand your infrastructure principles or how you do things like, zero data retention or, how you treat our data and where you store it or what et cetera, et cetera, or even, what models you're using to process the data. Because if they're not proprietary, I'd like to know if you're using models that were born in another country before I start to give you all of my stuff, et cetera. And I
Sure.
think there are real risks associated with those things. And so, we have a general principle that if an AI provider is not going to tell us what they or how they work, like it's a black box, then it's an immediate see you
It's a
later.
problem.
We'll go find this somewhere else. So I
Mm.
do think the security things are real. And I think you just have to do a little bit of due diligence. And considering you're talking about, companies that likely do have a director of IT or, someone familiar enough, I think there's a small enough rubric that you can put together that says, unless you meet these criteria as a provider relative to what you're going to do with my data, where you store it, how you're going to treat it, et cetera, I want to understand those things before I, get into bed with you, if you will.
Everything's risk reward, isn't it? I mean, it's just that nothing's 100% guaranteed. Nothing's 100% secure or private. I mean, every day, some large tech company, Department of Defense getting hacked, that kind of stuff. But I guess we all have to evaluate the risk and reward of using this stuff, right?
That's right.
Okay, next question. Speaking of data, um, you know, every company that I talk to, they want to use AI, they want to whatever. I mean, Salesforce.com is that we implement Salesforce. That's one of the things my company does, and they have all these Einstein and AI tools. And I'm like, yeah, except I would say to clients stuff like your database is a disaster, So at Cox's, you're implementing you're trying to automate and you're trying to build models. Talk to me about the importance of the accuracy and completeness of your data, and what do you do to get it
Yeah.
better?
Gene, let me tell you a secret. There isn't a company on this planet that has a clean
Right.
data ecosystem, period.
Amen.
Okay.
Amen. Amen.
So, if the myth to bust is that you need data harmony in order to go monetize your AI initiatives, you're crazy, right? And so, everybody for the most part is still looking after AI on a use case by use case basis or on an agent by agent basis, which I think at this moment is still appropriate, right? And our strategy says we want to what we call productize our AI, which means all of the AI capabilities we build have to be done in declarative ways, discretely defined data products or AI products that do a certain thing. We can measure, monitor, replace, remove, whatever on a product by product basis. It helps us manage the landscape a little bit differently.
Hmm.
If you think about it in that context, the data that you need, the harmony in the data that you need is really subject to what that agent or that product might need in order to be successful. And as long as you understand what you're putting in, then you'll understand what you're getting out.
Right.
And if you manage them on a small enough level, then the work to go cleanse data for that one agent's use may not be that much. Now, you may have some ambitions and go do a bigger project, which means you got to do a bigger data cleanup exercise. For enterprises, that's hard because we've got data everywhere. For small businesses, you should have relative control over the data that you have. And quite frankly, if you have sloppy or messy customer data at this point, AI is not going to help you. You're
Hmm.
already in trouble. Like, go fix your problems before you create new ones down the road. Like, you should be investing in those parts of your business to begin with.
I love it. By the way, that problem is like all problems in life. You have a big problem. If you break it down into smaller problems and you start addressing those smaller problems, right? Um,
100%.
That's how you can fix those things. Okay, final question. Deloitte at the end of last year came out with their state of AI study. I guess they're going to release another one soon for 20, end of 2025. But their prediction with AI is that most of AI is going to be happening behind the scenes without us even knowing it. It's just going to happen. So I'm glad that you're kind of like thinking about this. Whatever. I want to get your thoughts on that. How do you see AI being used by companies, people, businesses? What place do you think it's going to have as the years go on?
Oh man, I think this is I think the question's a black hole. So pull me
Yeah.
out. We'll tie the rope around my waist. You hold on to the end and tell me when it's time to start coming out. Uh, so the challenge in general that companies have are the same ones that we had 15 years ago. We are creating sprawl with our AI agents that are duplicating capabilities and functions across the board. I am
Mm,
trying dramatically to go wrangle all of that stuff before we have a. Do you remember the days of app rationalization?
mm,
We're still fighting those, right?
mm.
And now we're just layering on agent rationalization as a plan to come because these agents that do these things are going to be the same in 53 departments at an enterprise. And
Yep.
we're trying to drive standards at a layer to say, no, 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 we have hierarchies and usage patterns and archetypes. Like, please go adhere to these as we democratize access to building these things.
So you're seeing kind of a mess in the future, aren't you, internally?
Oh, 100%. And so then even if you think about it, we're contemplating now how we want to go solve what I think the ultimate problem is out there. And out there, there's the model war. And the model wars are, the Geminis, the Anthropics, the OpenAIs, the Metas of the world, et cetera, are all trying to figure out who's going to dominate, who will reign supreme in the end. And I like the idea that whoever ultimately figures out how to synthesize the access point to it, whoever figures out how to put the right experience on top of getting after the capabilities that sit behind the scenes is going to probably win. I think it's interesting as you hear, Gemini 3 hits the market. It's Google's greatest product yet. OpenAI is trying to figure out how to crack into the enterprise space. Anthropic's already gotten there, et cetera, with the
Hmm.
800,000 subscriptions that they've got, et cetera.
Hmm.
And then there's rumors of, well, is Gemini 3 going to be the model that sits behind Siri? And as soon as that happens, that's the question that I'm trying to figure out what really happens in the future because
Sure.
Gemini sits behind Siri. They're already in every Android phone, and now they're going to be in every Apple phone.
Yeah.
And I think that means that every time you use AI, you're using a Gemini model at that
Right.
point. So explicitly using the app on your phone to talk to Claude or to talk to ChatGPT, et
Right.
cetera.
Tell you what it really means. It means you should buy Google stock.
I mean, it really does, but at the end of the day, there's either going to be a rationalization of all of those large language models because they're just going to start, finding that the value of their outputs in new releases is only as good as the data that they've created, right? Because all of it that exists is already consumed. They're all already creating new versions of the internet to
Mm,
build their new frontier models. And so, at some point you have to ask yourself, does it really matter? Like,
mm,
does it matter what model I use in 2027, or do they
mm,
all pretty much do the same thing unless you have frontier models being applied to very specific scenarios that help me within the context of something? Like for medicine, this model just works better, or for whatever I'm doing over here, this model works better, et cetera. But I do feel like if companies in general don't get control of where they put all this stuff, you're
mm.
going to have sprawl, and it's going to be a hard mess to clean up.
Eric, you're great. Thank you very much. I had more questions I wanted to ask you, and we ran out of time. But you've given me so much that I can write about and use for this chapter in the book. So I really appreciate your time. And everybody, for those of you watching or listening to this, I've been speaking to Eric Pace, he's head of AI at Cox Communications. So thank you very much.
Thanks for having me, Gene.